So we are live on the Facebook. I request everybody to mute their mics. Only Rakesh ji and Subash ji will keep the mics on. Uniji, would you like to play the Ganesh Stuti?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
This is a very interesting, excellent Ganesh Sudhi
Yeah, please.
rendition by Siddhara Krishna Kumar.
Vignesham Pramadhanipam Ganapatim Ekadandadidevam Siddhesham Parashudharam Shivasutam Vidyapradam Mangalam Sindhurangam Trinetram Lambodaram Durvadalamoditam Herambam Vakratundam Varadabhayam Gauriputram Namami 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 Sahasrakodi Kirana Purita Vadanam Ganesham Sahasrakodi Kirana Purita Vadanam Ganesham Kundindram Sharavana Sahajadi Devam Gajamukham Kundindram Sharavana Sahajadi Devam Gajamukham Sahasra Kodi Kirana Purita Vadanam Ganesham Iha para sukrida vriddhi karatma nivedita Iha para sukrida vriddhi karatma nivedita Ambujaksha Vignesham Suresham Ambujaksha Vignesham Suresham
Om Shri Ganesh.
Kirana Purita Vadanam Ganesham Hariಭೂಷಣಕರಂ ಸರಸಿರುಹೇ ಕ್ಷಣಂ भवसाज सुरेशं शनिदोषहरस्य सुतं शरवण भवसाज सुरेशं शनिदोषहरस्य सुतं शैलसुतशङ्करतनयं शरणं तव पदयुगलं शैलसुतशङ्करतनयं शरणं तव पदयुगलं सहस्रकोटिकिरणपूरित वदनं गणेशं कुम्भेन्द्रं शरवण सहजादिदेवं गजमुखं सहस्रकोटिकिरणपूरितं वदनं गणेशं
Finished.
सुरेशं शनिदोषहरस्य सुतं
Om Shri Ganeshaya Namah. Namaskar everyone. Welcome to the second day of week-long blissful talk series on Mahamaheshwar Acharya Abhinavgupt, which started from yesterday and will continue till 21st June, Nirjala Ekadashi, birth anniversary day of Mahamaheshwar Acharya. We will start today's session with these shlokas. Jayanti Jagadananda Vipakya Khyapana Khyama Paramesh Mukhodbhuta Gyana Chandra Marichaya Vishatmikam Tadutirnam Hridayam Parameshwata Paradishaktirupena Suparantim Samvidam Namah Namah Shivaya Satatam Panchakriti Vidayini Chidananda Gana Swatma Paramatma Vasini. Jai Gurudev. The great philosopher and poet, literally mystic, Mahamaheshwar Acharya Abhinavgupt fused all the old teachings of Tantra, Shaktism of Kola together, including the non-dualism of Advaita, and merged all together into one philosophy of Trika. His teachings and wisdom was not confined to the boundaries of Kashmir only, but like rising sun, it spread over the entire Bharatvarsha. To know more about this great philosopher of Kashmir, our topic for today is Abhinavgupt's reconciliation of the Bhagavad Gita and the Shaiva tradition. Our speaker for today is Sri Subash Kak. He will be having a dialogue with what we call a samvad with Sri Rakesh Kaul. Sri Subash Kak is Regents Professor at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater and has worked on artificial intelligence, quantum information, history of science. He has a deep interest in Shaivism and science of consciousness. He has authored 20 books, which include Mind and Self, The Wishing Tree, and The Circle of Memory. Sri Subhashi is also a member of Prime Minister's Science, Technology, and Innovation Advisory Council. Now about Sri Rakesh Kaul. He's an author, writer, historian, and a great researcher. The books he has authored are The Last Queen of Kashmir. A very warm welcome to both of the speakers. Now I request Sri Rakesh Kaul to kindly start their dialogue session with Sri Subash Kak. Over to Rakesh Kaul.
Thank you, Jyoti ji, and thank you, Sunil ji, for this invitation. Before I get into the conversation with Professor Subash Kak, I must make a confession. I must have done something very right in my previous birth that 55 years ago in college, I ended up having the good fortune to have Professor Kak as my advisor. That was the beginning of a lifelong relationship based on great admiration and respect. While Jyoti ji has described Subash Kak ji in terms of his contributions, I look at Subash through a different lens. When I look at Subashji from the 5,000-year long arc of the history of our people, and we see women and men, the luminous Kayurvati, Utpaladeva, Abhinavgupt, all the way to Swami Lakshmanju, to Pandit Gopi Krishna. History will record that Professor Kak has taken giant steps in bringing forward our body of knowledge that reconciles everything that our Shaivite framework presents to humanity with cutting-edge science. His most recent paper on the E-dimensions of the universe is worthy of a Nobel Prize. So with that, as my homage to my preceptor Subash Kak, let us start the session. Subashji, if the story of Kashmir could be said to start with the demon Jalodhara, and the history of Kashmir could be said to start with Krishna's visit to Kashmir, then why is it that people ask the question, hey, why would a Shaivite write about a Vaishnavite book? After all, the Shaivite is not required to write on the three canonical texts as the Vedantins did, the Prasthanatriya, the Upanishad, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutra. Can you help resolve this dichotomy, Shaivite, Vaishnavite, how it arose, what is the fallacy in it, and what was Abhinavagupta's correction and message to the world in this commentary on the Bhagavad Gita?
Thank you, Rakesh ji, for your introduction. Thank you, Sunil ji and Jyoti ji, for giving me this opportunity to speak in this wonderful week-long celebration of Acharya Abhinavagupta's great contributions. Acharya Abhinavagupta, as everybody acknowledges, one of the greatest polymaths and geniuses who ever lived anywhere, and living about 1,000 years ago, at the end of a millennium-long period of Kashmiri history, which was probably the most brilliant place anywhere on earth at that time, from about 100 or 200 CE to 1200 or 1300, was one of the most brilliant places anywhere on earth, with luminaries in so many different fields, from architecture to music to story writing to the greatest storybook ever written in my view, namely Yoga Vasishtha, Vishnu Dharmottar Puran, Natya Shastra, all other stuff, and of course the great Shaiva Darshan, where Abhinavagupta placed his seal with his amazing bringing together of all of these threads into a whole, which now is once again center stage, because Shaiva Darshan is really about consciousness, and modern science is also discussing consciousness. So we are center stage, or Acharya Abhinavagupta is center stage. So now to the question that Rakesh ji asked, how did Abhinavagupta bring together, reconcile, or try to reconcile Vaishnavism and Shaivism, the Vaishnav stream and the Shaiva stream, because Abhinavagupta did write Gita Sangraha, which is his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. And as we know, he wrote Tantra Loka and Abhinav Bharati, which is his commentary on Natya Shastra, and so many other texts, seminal texts in many different fields. So this requires our going back and looking at what really is the beginnings of both the Vaishnava and the Shaiva tradition, which in my view has been quite clear to all these luminaries in Kashmir and may not have been that clear to textbook writers of modern India who have been talking about this sectarian divide. In fact, I think I should bring in a great remark made by Ananda Kumaraswamy, the great writer, half English and half Sri Lankan, the great writer on Indian philosophy and art, where he says that literally all that you will find by Western scholars on Hinduism and their followers is not correct. It's correct in details, but when they bring it all together, it's not correct at all. And therefore, let's go back and ask what is the sense that it's not correct? Well, in Vajasaneyi's Samhita, it's stated that from Agni were born both the Rudra and the Shiva aspects. And these Rudra and Shiva aspects of Agni. Agni is both the fire, the outside fire. It's also the flame of consciousness. Just as the outside fire has heat, which can burn you, and it also has light, which is wonderful, which embraces us and lets us see the world. So likewise, consciousness has two aspects. One is Rudra, which is fierce, or Rudra and Bhairava, and the other is Shiva, which is auspicious, right? So there are these two aspects. So complementarity is the central idea of the Vedas. And in this complementarity, you can look at the universe from consciousness out, which is the Shaivite vision, or you can look at it from the universe in, because Vishnu is from Vish, who pervades the entire reality. So from outside in, and that's the Vaishnava tradition. But really there are two complementary views, which is the reason why in many texts, it's stated that Vishnu is Shiva and Shiva is Vishnu. And of course, we have Harihara, for example. The Harihara image is half Hari and half Hara, Hara meaning Shiva. So, so this fact, this deep rahasyam, if you will, was quite evident to scholars in the Kashmiri tradition. And in fact, the Kashmiri Bhagavad Gita, which is I think about 20 shlokas longer than the standard Bhagavad Gita of 700 shlokas, was also, let's not forget, edited by Swami Lakshmanju in the 1930s. And Swami Lakshmanju there starts up by stressing the fact that Abhinavagupta looks at Kurukshetra as also Karana Kshetra, the Kshetra of action. Now, I must stress before we start imagining that the two Bhagavad Gitas are different, they're literally identical. They're just a couple of differences, switch of words. For example, 110, where people have wondered, why is Sanjay telling Dhritarashtra, aparyaptam tad asmakam balam bhishma bhirakshitam, right? That our force is aparyapta. Why would Sanjay say that to Dhritarashtra? Because he also says, paryaptam tva idam etesham balam bhima abhirakshitam, that the Pandavas' force is paryapta and our own force is aparyapta. So in the Kashmiri Bhagavad Gita, these two words are switched. So there it's aparyaptam, as would be logical, aparyaptam for Bhima's force, the force of Pandavas, and aparyaptam for Bhishma's force, which is the force of the Kauravas. So this is the spring wells, the beginnings, um, uh, Abhinavagupta, as all of Kashmiri society, because the two greatest festivals that we celebrate in Kashmir are Shivaratri, where we, of course, worship Shiva, and Janamashtami, which is, of course, celebrated one day earlier. So it's Janam Saptami in Kashmir. So we do Krishna and Shiva both, because these are two aspects which has been recognized by the Acharyas and the scholars from Kashmir.
Thank you, Subhashji. There's so much there to unpack. You're so right. The Mahabharata says Vishnu and Shiva are the same. And the names of Shiva, Sarva, Sthanu, Isana, Rudra, these are all in the Vishnu Sahasranama. They are amongst the names of Vishnu. So unfortunately, in recent times, this sectarian thinking has become dominant, and people all want to say we have the greater God. But there's so much you said. So let me pick up on a couple of things, and we get deeper into the detail. You mentioned about the consciousness perspective that Abhinavagupta brought to the Gita, and I want to just go a little bit deeper in it. When a Hindu dies, it is quite common that the Hindu household will play chapter 8 of the Bhagavad Gita. It's quite common. Now, Abhinavagupta, in his commentary of chapter 8, makes two very interesting statements. The second one is where I really want to get your perspective on. The first statement he makes, he says, at the last moment of leaving the body, whatever one had meditated on in one's whole life, whatever that is, the person attains that at the time of leaving the body. Okay, so that's sort of interesting, because it sort of completely is contrary to the Abrahamic faith, where the priest will go and say to the guy, okay, convert, and you will have salvation. And Abhinavagupta saying, no, that nonsense doesn't work. Whatever you did over the course of a life, whatever you meditate on, that thou shalt attain. Okay, but the second sentence is remarkable. He says, meditate on God the very next moment after you separate from your body. Because this is the first moment when the suffering caused by the association with the body ceases. Okay, now, if you have separated from the body, you have separated from the mind. There's no body, good, no suffering, but you're separated from the mind. So what is it that's meditating? What is it that is thinking about God? Can we get your explanation of that in our frame?
Wonderful. Very, very subtle questions, and one can spend hours discussing them from so many different perspectives. I think it helps to step back and ask, who are we in our normal life, in our normal moments? In our normal moments, once again, we are both our consciousness and our body. Now, our consciousness, as even modern medicine has shown, consciousness is not located at any specific position in the brain. You do functional MRI and you try to look for which part of the brain is lighting up, and it lights up at different places depending upon what you're doing. So that consciousness is all over your brain. So if consciousness is not in your body and it's apart, then who are you? Because what this really means is that just as we have the dance of Shiva, so we ourselves are in a position of continuing unceasing dance between awareness, which is freedom, and location in our body, especially if you have pain or something, in which case we are stuck in the body awareness, right? So there are two awarenesses, and these two awarenesses are of course mentioned in the Rig Veda itself, Dva Suparna, that there are two beautiful birds, two golden birds, who are both on the branch of a tree. And these two golden birds are the Sakshi consciousness, the Sakshi within us, which is Paramatma, and the mind consciousness, which is sort of based on the body, but it's reflecting what it gets of awareness, which is the Shiva aspect through us. So the question then is, when you're talking of separation from the body, it's at that particular moment, because always, every moment we are in this dance. We are either one or the other. And what the Gita teaches us, or the Trika system, or what Abhinavagupta ji teaches us, is that, look, meditation is to identify oneself more with the prakash than with its reflection, because the mind is a mirror, right? And that's in all texts, even in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. The vrittis are the dirt on the mirror, so to speak, the eddies created by thoughts. So how do we still those eddies so that this mirror can reflect the glory of Shiva as clearly as possible, right? And so it's at that particular moment. I suppose the whole idea is in this is that, look, ultimately, since Shivoham, each one of us is Shiva. If we identify by Shiva, then you can obtain whatever you can have. That sankalpa. So it's through sankalpa that the universe is created. So likewise, in our own personal position, through our sankalp, in this life, because we are looking at one final departure, Mahaparinirvan, the final moment of the moment of death. But in reality, this transition of dying takes place every day. We are changing every day. So the lesson there is that, look, just as moksha is literally every day, to separate oneself from the sequence of karma, which holds us in our pashu form. Pashus are like us, but they are completely, their behavior and their fate is sort of determined by a whole sequence of actions which have been set forth before them, right? So likewise, we have a pashu aspect to our existence, and by identifying with the Shiva, by recognizing, not identifying, by recognizing that we are really Shiva, we set ourselves free. And that's what moksha is. Moksha is something that happens all the time. And if you can obtain, moksha means mukti from this chain of actions. And if you obtain mukti from this chain, then you are free, and then you are representing the will of Shiva. Then you become a part, you become one of the players in the Leela that's been set up.
Absolutely fascinating. So let's go a little bit deeper on moksha. Abhinavgupt himself answers the question as to why he wrote the book. He lays it out right up front. And he makes two very interesting points, and it would be good to get your thoughts about it. One, he claims, he says, hey, the Gita has secret knowledge, Guhyatma. There's secret knowledge that Krishna gave, which is far more esoteric than Vedanta. It's the message of supreme non-duality. And that I, Abhinavgupt, from the viewpoint of Kashmir Shaiva metaphysics, as opposed to, Shankara or other Samkhya or Vedanta, I'm going to show you that Gita is uniquely qualified to grant moksha and merge with Lord Shiva. I mean, that's a real amazing assertion. And then he goes on to make his case, obviously, in the commentary. So my question is this: the message of Gita, is it truly a message that Krishna gave that operates at many different levels, so that for a deeper depth, they can resonate at that secret esoteric message that Krishna was giving, whereas a common person can just read it and resonate at the level that works for them? Your thoughts on Abhinavgupt's starting proposition that Krishna had a secret message and Abhinavgupt is the first one to reveal, and that Gita is uniquely qualified to grant moksha, which is merging with Shiva.
Rakesh ji, I first of all totally agree with you that the whole Vedic river, if you will, presents understanding which can be interpreted at many different levels based on where the seeker is. And, it's like climbing a staircase, and you go to the next step, and you don't jump from the bottom to the very top right away, which is the reason why you have to do sadhana, because otherwise you could say that, well, here, this is what it is. Paramatma is within me, or Shiva is within me, so I am going to be dancing all over. That's all there is to it. No, there are many deeper layers because you have to understand the infinitude of the power, not understand, embrace it within yourself. The infinitude of the power of Shiva, of the power, because it's a transcendent reality. It's not like you and me, Shiva, our self. Paramatma is beyond time and space, right? Shiva is beyond time and space. And therefore, one's got to go through this whole step-by-step journey. And depending upon where you are, you find a certain satisfaction that, hey, it's all together. And as you meditate further on it, you realize that, well, you have to go further up. And that's why this whole sequence of obtaining understanding takes you from one level of paroksha or paradox to another level of paradox. And therefore, this is this whole journey. This journey, while you're doing it, you're also obtaining freedom, because this mukti that one obtains, which is when one is like Shiva, is not permanent, because once again, we come back to our body, right? You have that flash, that lightning, and that lightning is like Parvati, you have the goddess, because ultimately it's through the agency of the goddess, of the Devi, that we make these steps. We don't jump up by ourselves. We have to, the goddess has to, so to speak, hold our hand and help us go on to the next step. But let me also talk about something else here. In Bhagavad Gita 15:15, Krishna tells Arjuna that, look, it's I who has created Smriti, Gyan, and Apohan. Smriti is, of course, memory, Gyan is knowledge, and Apohan is forgetting. So it's all out there, and it's because of forgetting you have forgotten your true nature, right? So in this sequence, which is, of course, the standard Vaishnava sequence, Smriti comes first and Gyan comes subsequent to Smriti. But now, in his great commentary on Utpal Deva's Ishwar Pratibhigya Vimarshini, um, Abhinavagupta says that, look, uh, it's Gyan, Smriti, and Apohan. Through the Shaivite lens, that Gyan comes first and Smriti comes later. And this is once again, the complementarity of Smriti and Gyan, because, look at the modern West, it's all about information. Information can be connected to Smriti in some sense, right? It's memory of some stuff. So it's information. But information by itself does not provide you meaning, which is why the West or modern world is lost. Everybody's lost. They don't have any sense of what life is all about. So, so Gyan is something which is different from Smriti. And in the Vaishnava tradition or the Bhagavad Gita, because here Krishna is trying to provide a specific lesson to Arjuna, that here you have this smriti of all the teaching that I have given you and the life that you have led, which is also a lesson. Now I have provided you a vision, the cosmic vision. So you have Gyan now. And now you know that one forgets that because of Apohan Shakti, therefore you know the entire sequence. But in Ishwar Pratibhigya Vimarshini Trika of Abhinavagupta, he says that, look, you can also view it as Shiva is the one entity. So the whole universe, Shiva is this axis. The whole universe is tied to this axis. So the whole basis of this universe is knowledge, is Gyan, which is Shiva. But it's covering, there is avaran around it. So as the avaran is removed, that's when you have Smriti. But then it gets covered once again, which is why you have Apohan. And therefore this dance of Shiva has two aspects, one of veiling, the other of unveiling. And which is the reason why the unveiling has an aspect which is fierce, which is the Aghora, for example, or the Rudra aspect, or the Bhairava aspect. And the other is the auspicious aspect, the Shiva aspect, or the grace through which you obtain knowledge, which is the Ishan aspect. So there are these aspects. So in other words, consciousness is not a single thing. It's not because the flame, just as flame has many colors, the once you start examining light, prakash, because in Shaiva Darshan, in Trika, Shiva is prakash and Prakriti is vimarsh. It's the energizing of the reality, the embodied reality through this prakash. And bringing together of prakash and vimarsh is what sadhana is all about. And once you are able to do it, you get transformed. So ultimately that transformation, that mukti occurs here. You don't have to wait till the end of your life. It happens now, here, now.
Wow, thank you. That trinity of Gyan, Smriti, Apohan. Thank you for how beautifully you brought in the IPV observation and helping us understand that Gyan encapsulates in it the dance of Shiva, the veiling and unveiling. I had never understood it that way. So I'd like to explore further Gyan and the Trinity aspect, and something that Gita and Abhinav talks a lot about, which is the other Trika, where the bookend is Icha and Kriya to Gyana. And so two questions. The first one regarding Icha, very interesting observation that the two greatest enemies in the Gita are Kama and Krodha. Attachment and anger are the two eyes. Anger is obviously frustrated attachment or unfulfilled desire. And Abhinavagupta makes a very interesting. He gives us a very interesting metaphor. He says that you should place all your sense organs in between your two eyes. The so-called third eye. Place it there because Kama and Krodha will destroy, both right knowledge and right action. So, that's the first question dealing with Icha. The second question is the other bookend, which is Kriya. And in Kriya, again, this commentary has some very interesting implications because the Advaita Vedantins maintain Kriya implies imperfection. After all, if you're perfect, why do you have to act? And therefore, the dominant role is for knowledge. It's knowledge, Gyana over action. But the Shaivites maintain that Kriya is Shiva's very nature, and you touched about it, that Shiva is Swatantra, Shiva is free. So Shiva is free to act too. So can we get your thoughts about Icha, Gyan, and Kriya, just in the way you talked about Gyan, Smriti, and
Well, this whole knowledge, there's an esoteric aspect to it. And that esoteric aspect is related to how one does this journey oneself in one's own sadhana. Now, for example, this whole process of meditation, of Kundalini awakening, if you will, there are three knots of nerves inside the body, right at the bottom, that's called Brahma Granthi. Right in the middle is called Vishnu Granthi. And since you mentioned the point, the third eye between the eyebrows, that's the Rudra Granthi, right? So now the whole thing is how to raise one's consciousness. And all these are aspects of oneself. Karma, for example, is the Brahma Granthi, that's aspect of our life to propagate ourselves. But also the very nature that we are bodies, we want to extend our force, our reach, and we want to control. And that's the domination aspect of it, which also can lead to growth because you meet with resistance from others. But now, how to do this? And there are certain questions which one meets or needs to resolve in one's own sadhana, which are sort of too complicated for us to untangle right now. But there's significant point of difference, if you will, in the interpretations of Vedanta as encapsulated by Shankara's system and Kashmir Shaivism, is that in Shankara himself, he was a sannyasi, he was in his 30s, he was a renunciate. So he was looking at it from the perspective of what the renunciate do. They are not actively participating in worldly life, where you have family and children and so on and so forth, where everything is balanced out. But now, Abhinavagupta, although he himself never married, but he was part of the family. We know a lot about his family, his sister, his relatives. Abhinavagupta was more attuned to how the Vedic rishis lived, because the Vedic rishis were all householders. The Vedic rishis quite consistent with Kashmir Shaivite view of this physical reality itself as an embodiment of divinity. You know, as Prakriti. Prakriti is a goddess, or Bhumi Devi, for example, is a goddess. So, as ultimately who teaches us is goddess. Even Shankara, he wrote Saundarya Lahari. You know, he also worshipped the goddess, because you might speak of Shiva as being distant, as being the transformed self, but he knew that he had to go through the goddess, and the goddess here represents your own self, your own psychological self, which has its own structure, as, for example, described in Sri Vidya. And Sri Vidya, as you know, scholars believe also evolved or came up in Kashmir and then spread all over. In fact, right now, Sri Vidya is one of the dominant intellectual sadhana systems all over India, especially in South India. And it's also tied up with Kashmir Shaivism. Because how do we do it? There are two things. One is talking in an abstract way about Shiva. The other is practice. And the practice is going within, and the very architecture of your consciousness with all its doors and so on. And you have goddess Sri Lalita right in the end, right? Tripura Sundari, right? In the very heart of your being. So how do we make that journey to the very heart of your being? So both these aspects are there as a part of what Acharya Abhinavagupta, in his exposition of the tantras, because tantras is the architecture, tantra is the architecture of the consciousness, did.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you one last question, and then I'm sure that Sunil and Jyoti may have the audience ask you a few questions. You mentioned that every movement is a movement that is created and then dissolves. So, you know, you can get moksha while alive. And in chapter 11, verse 18, Subhashji, there is something fascinating that had never struck me before until today. And I had gone back to refresh myself on Abhinavagupta's commentary. And he talks about the adept, you know, the sapata, the adept, who has reached a stage where there is no differentiation between Gyana and Kriya Shakti, equally flowing in those two states. And then he describes dharma. I had never, ever seen this definition of dharma. He says for this sapata, dharma is the ability to create and destroy objects, create and destroy experiences. That this individual who's performing this as dharma at every moment is fully engaged in experiencing the world the way a householder would, as you said, the way a Kashmiri Pandit lives his life, fully engages in that world, but that immediately after that engagement has the capacity to renounce. What is that play there? What is that dharma there that Abhinavagupta was asking us to absorb and imbibe?
Well, you know, one is sthita pragya, which is what Krishna speaks about.
Yeah.
Once, you know, for that one requires, first of all, tremendous ethical preparation, the yamas and the niyamas, right? And they've been described in different ways, also in Yoga Sutras. So once you have that, something wonderful happens. And this is that attachment, love is a great power. Sometimes people wonder, why is it that Krishna is speaking about detachment, right? Because if you're detached, then aren't you separate from everybody else? But attachment and detachment are two aspects. If you are detached in a non-possessive way from others, your love becomes much more flowing. And then you are attached to everybody in a more wholesome and beautiful way, right? And I think that's what also ultimately inheres with Kriya. And you are perfectly right. Kriya becomes an expression of dharma itself, because then you are part of the flow. Part of the flow, you become an instrument of Shiva. You are doing things not out of your small ego, but out of the large aham, which is the Shiva within you. And therefore, once it's the large aham and not the small aham, the small ego, which gets us distracted into this small thing or that thing, this possession or that possession, then you get transformed. So ultimately, and this is something that's not been stressed very much, ultimately, through this emerges love, and that's a love that all great sadhaks, like Mirabai, who worshipped Krishna, those sadhaks felt that love as a force. And this is also, of course, in the Kashmiri tradition, the great Kangra painters who left Kashmir after they were exiled, in 1300s. This great miniature painting, and there were some of the greatest painters like Nine Suk and so on from in the Kangra style, and they have given such beautiful expression to this love between Radha and Krishna, which once again is really connected to these wonderful ideas of Shiva within us. And so it all comes together. Ichha and Kriya become one. Become one as expression of Gyana. The three, Ichha Shakti, Gyana Shakti, and Kriya Shakti, they become one.
Subhaji, thank you so much for bringing in that and ending with the great aham, which is Shivoham, and especially your very positive message of love. Thank you for bringing in our artists. I'm reminded of a painting by one of our ancestors who, when we suffered the first beginning of genocide, migrated to Himachal Pradesh. This is this extraordinary painting of Radha and Krishna. So it's very apt to the subject. And they're both looking at each other. The title of the painting is The Gaze, The Gaze. And the poet has written a verse. He has said, the gaze between two lovers is like a taut string. It is so taut that two hearts can step on that string and cross over into each other. In that gaze, there cannot be any wavering, because if there's wavering, the heart will fall. You've given us a remarkable overview of Abhinavagupt's critique, commentary, exposition of the Bhagavad Gita, the deep insights. I thank you on behalf of our community. As always, you are our preceptor and you take us into places that are just absolutely, in one word, chamatkar. Thank you.
Thank you, Rakesh ji, and Ashirwad to everybody.
Thank you, Subash sir. I would request Professor Suri Sopori ji to present the vote of thanks. Suri sir.
Sir, I wish this dialogue never ended. It was going on in the true tradition of Kashmir Shaivism. where question and answers. Parvati asks questions to Shiva, and Shiva keeps answering and explaining each and every point. And this question answer session, which we always been reading between Shiva and Parvati, is basically to benefit the humanity. She always asks how to help the humanity. And I think this session which we saw between Rakesh Kaul and Subash Kak was probably in that context where the answers, the questions which were raised and the answers provided by Subhashji has really benefited all of us. I've heard Subash Kakji many times earlier, read some of his books which he sent to me, especially the Shiv Sutras. Once I contacted him and told that one of our friend and a relative has translated Shiv Sutras in Hindi. And then he sent me his commentary on Shiv Sutras. It was wonderfully written, I think. These are the kind of things which our younger generation probably should read in order to get a glimpse about what all this Shaivism really means about. To me, Shaivism has been part of the family traditions, although I never got a chance to study in too much detail in the early part of my life, being associated with Swami Lakshmanju right from the day I was born. And also the two of his greatest shishas, Sharika Bhagwati and Prabha Devi ji, who had been my father's sisters. So we have been associated with them right from childhood. When talking about this Bhagavad Gita, on which this partly this discourse was on, and Swami Lakshmanju has given a commentary on this. In fact, the Hindi translation of this was done long back by Prabhaji. And that copy is still with us, and many people have been reading. In fact, many people abroad have taken this from it. And she has, last year, she taught it to the disciples who used to come on Sundays for puja here. I got an opportunity to also get something through my ear. Shruti hui, maine padha, thoda hai usko. And that has been recorded also. Maybe I will, sometimes if Sunil ji wants, I think we can even send that recordings of what Prabhaji taught, the Hindi version and explanations of this ones. And this Abhinavagupta's translation and explanation of Bhagavad Gita is, gives a very different meaning to many of the things which are written there. In fact, the first one itself, Dharam Khetre, Kuru-Khetre, Abhinavagupta has a tendency to bring everything within. So he describes everything within his body, what is happening all around. The whole universe seems to be existing within himself. And this Dharam Khetra, Kurukshetra, he also explains that this is the whole body, which is the Dharam Khetra. The Kurukshetra is this. And the fight is between Kaurava and Pandavas with the good thoughts and the bad thoughts. And these are always occurring within your mind. And how do you control this, good and bad thoughts? It is only if you develop, as Subhash was saying, love for Lord Krishna, love for Lord Krishna. Krishna will be able, and Krishna is what we call as the consciousness, which will be able to clear this differentiation between good and bad thoughts. So this is the kind of good explanations which are given in a Shaivite way to this Gita. In fact, the last one, which is the last one of 18th chapter, Yatra Yogeshwara Krishna, Yatra Partha Dhanurdhara, Tatra Shri Vijaya Bhuta. So the explanation for this, which Prabhaji gave me, maybe that what Swamiji has told, Swami Lakshmanju, is Krishna here means the consciousness, the knowledge. Yatra Yogeshwara Krishna, where there is knowledge. And Yatra Partho Dhanurdhara. Dhanurdhara is action. He is the action part of it. And whenever you combine knowledge with action, that is where you will get success. And if you have only knowledge within yourself, you might achieve a certain level of achievement. But unless both things are there, moksha will not be there. And Jivan Mukta, what he says, is one who has extreme knowledge and who has practiced to reach to that level. So there are so many good things about Shaivism. I think people like laymen like me like to look at it, because they say that if you are in Grahastha it is best to learn Shaivism, because that helps you to go through this grasp the period and also achieve some level of moksha. Towards moksha you can go in. And that is the good part of it. It's an ocean. The literature is ocean, and Subash Kak ji has read so much of it. And the beauty is that being a scientist and a computer engineer part of it, he has the knack of explaining it to laymen like us. And this is the good part of Subash ji. Thank you so much, Subash ji, Rakesh ji, Rajneesh ji is here. So many people are around here. And we really enjoyed, and I hope we'll get more such opportunity of listening to this kind of dialogue in other seminars also. Thank you so much, Subash ji. It was wonderful listening to you.
Thank you, Sudhir ji. Wonderful points that you made. And I didn't know about your connections with Swami Lakshmanju. Wonderful. And perhaps if we had some kind of a internet resource where all of this information was there for everybody to have, not just the Kashmiri Pandit community, but the entire world, texts and so on. Because now the age of books is gone. If you have access to information readily, that will be a wonderful thing. But of course, that requires a lot of work and so on.
In fact, Swami Lakshmanju his eldest sister was married to my father, his first wife.
Oh,
Mamu kehte the. So it was Matamal for us to visit the ashram was a Matamal.
मैं भी आश्रम एक दो बार गया हूँ, लेकिन बहुत ही सुन के बहुत अच्छा लगा कि आपका इतना निकट संबंध था उनके साथ.
उनका आशीर्वाद ही रहा जो कुछ ना कुछ कर पाए. Thank you so much, Sunil.
Thank you, Sunil sir, for such a nice commentaries which you shared with us. It reminds me of our Sunday Aarti at our Ishwara Ashram, where we say Hari Rev Jagat Jagadev Hari. Hari to Jagato Nahi Binna Mano. Iti Yasamati Paramartha Gati. Sanaro Bhava Sagar Muttarati. Hari Jagat means the God is this world, and Jagadev Hari. Jagat is the God. Iti Yasamati means there is no difference between Hari and Jagat, and the one who realizes it gets the moksha. So that is the essence of Kashmiri Shaivism as well, that Hari and Jagat are one. So we have to celebrate life, evolve, enlighten ourselves, enlighten the people around, and that is the continuous journey. And this was beautifully summed up by Professor Subash Kak ji. We are really blessed. In one of the phrases of Tantra Loka, Acharya Abhinavagupta says, Agad Sanshaya Ambodh Sam Uttara Tarani Vande Vichitra Artha Padam Chitram Tam Guru Bharati. Means the words of the Gurus and the Masters are the only one which will ferry you across the samsara. So I think today we are a bit more enlightened by the words of Professor Subash Kak ji, and I'm sure we may have crossed few more notches towards realizing our own inner self, and that is nothing else but Shiva. So with this concluding remarks, we have a Shanti mantra. I request Sanjay Raina ji, if he is here, he can unmute, and then we can part away. But before that, I would like also to tell you that tomorrow we have two sessions. In the morning, we have a session on Kashmiri Shaivism Darshan and Abhinavagupta's teaching from Punjabi University, Patiala. In the evening, that's at 11 a.m. And in the evening, we have a session at 7 p.m. as like today. And Mark Diskowski is going to give his talk tomorrow at 7 p.m. So I request everybody to be a part of both these lectures. Sanjay ji, now it's over to you. Please.
नमस्कार. नमस्कार. भगवद गीता से एक श्लोक उद्धृत करेंगे सुभाष जी ने. इस महान श्लोक पर चर्चा की. इसी से शांति पाठ आरंभ करेंगे. सर्वस्य चाहम हृदि संनिविष्टम मता समतेर्ज्ञानम अपोहनम च वेदश्च सर्वे अहमेव वेदो वेदांत कृत्वे विधेय चाहम यस्मिन् उन्मेषि निशाव्याम जगता प्रलयोदयो तम शक्ति चक्र विभवम प्रभवम शंकरम सुतमा विश्वात्मिकां तदुतीर्णां हृदयं परमेशतो परादिशक्तिरूपेण सुपुरन्तीं संविदं नमः। विश्वैकरूप विश्वात्मा विश्वसर्गादिकारणं परप्रकाशवपुषं सुतमासुच्छन्दभैरवम्। नमः शिवाय सततं पञ्चकृत्यविद्यायिने चिदानन्दघन स्वात्म परमार्थाभिगुवासनि परं परस्थं गहनादिनादिम् एकं निविष्टं बहुधा गुहासु सर्वालयं सर्वचराचरस्थं तमेव शम्भो शरणं प्रपद्ये। शांति शांति शांति।
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Subash ji. Thank you, Sunil ji. Thank you, Rakesh ji, for moderating. Thank you, Sanjay ji. And thank you all the listeners who have joined here on the Zoom as well as on the Facebook. Namaskar.
Thank you.
Thank you.